I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to find those words to say goodbye with my wife and his younger brother. And, hearing your child say, "I'm going to miss you, Daddy," just destroys you.
The One Percenter Podcast with Sam Bakhtiar, bringing you the 1% knowledge to help you reach your full potential. Learn what it takes to rise above the 99% and become a 1%er.
Everybody, welcome to the One Percenter Podcast. This is your host, Sam Bakhtiar, and I have my man, Brant Menswar, in the house.
Hey, Sam.
He's the man who's going to have a life-changing experience expert. He helps you identify your core values so that you can choose your purpose, live your truth, and change what's possible. He addresses these topics in his new book, Black Sheep, Unleash the Extraordinary, All-Inspiring, Undiscovered You. Welcome, Brant.
Thanks for having me, Sam. I appreciate you being here with me.
So I know your PR agency, reached out to me.
Sure.
When I saw this, I'm like, I got to talk to this guy. Because what you offer is so much needed, and just tell me, like, why you come up with this program. How are you in this field, and how has this just come about?
Well, it wasn't what was expected, that's for sure. I spent the last 20 years or so in the music business, 2 different bands, 2 different record deals, sort of touring the world and being very fortunate to play music for a living. And in 2012, my oldest son was diagnosed with a rare blood cancer, and that led to this lengthy 263 straight day battle in the hospital with him fighting. And during that time, it really hit me that I was winging it, that I hadn't had these non-negotiables in my life defined. What are my core values? And so during that time, I made a bunch of really horrible decisions that were sort of fueled by the emotion of the moment, and went on to regret those decisions for years and years afterwards.
What were some of those decisions?
Well, the main one that sort of was the crux of writing the book was we faced this situation with our son where he had the bone marrow transplant that he needed to survive. He ended up developing something called graft versus host disease, had it at the worst level. It was threatening his life. And so the way that they treat that is they super suppress the immune system so the body won't fight back. And when they did that, he contracted a deadly fungus. And the way that you treated the fungus was by super boosting the immune system. And so they had 2 things that were threatening him with opposite treatments that created this ZeroSum Game. And so we got called into the parents' lounge after a couple of 100 days in there. And they told us that no matter what they treated, the other was going to take his life. And there was nothing else they could do. They didn't think he was actually going to make it through the night. So they sent us back to say our goodbyes and, call the family in and do all those sorts of things. And when we went back there, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to find those words to say goodbye with my wife and his younger brother. And, hearing your child say, "I'm going to miss you, Daddy," just destroys you. Right. And so we ended up sitting there all night. I called my younger brother who lived 1,500 miles away and said, "Listen, you're not going to have time to make it. So if you want to say your goodbyes, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to do it over the phone." And so he did. He was incredibly distraught, as you could imagine. And that night, feeling sort of helpless, he sat on his couch and he filmed this video holding up these poster boards that said, "My nephew's dying. We're running out of time. He has less than 24 hours. Here's what's happening. If you have any ideas, if you have any thoughts, please help us. We're desperate." He never said a word. He simply held up 55 of those poster boards over the course of 3 minutes. He played the song "Fix You" by Coldplay from start to finish. And when it was done, he stopped the video. He uploaded it to YouTube. And, the next morning, Theo, my son, had made it through the night, sat on the edge of that bed, sort of waiting for him to pass. And my phone's ringing off the hook and I'm trying to ignore it. I'm trying to be present. And after a couple of hours, my phone is literally hot from vibrating. So I pick it up and I look and I see all these names and numbers from people who I don't know. And what I didn't know, first of all, I didn't know my brother had made that video and uploaded it to YouTube. But by the time I had reached for my phone, it had already been seen over 500,000 times. And I was getting calls and messages from people from all over the world. And a few of them happened to be doctors. And so one of them was a doctor at MD Anderson at Houston who happened to be one of the leading sort of researchers in this fungus that was attacking him. And he said, there's this brand new alternate treatment that I don't know that your doctor's aware of. Would you mind if I talk to him? I think it might help. And so we let him talk. And then I got a call from Dr. Tim Johnson from Good Morning America, who said, you tell your doctor anybody he wants to speak with, get me a list and I'll try to make it happen in the next 24 hours. And so we did. And Dr. Johnson kept his word. And so we spoke with a doctor at Dana-Farber in Boston and a research scientist at Cornell University. And the four doctors put their heads together and they came up with this crazy plan to try to save my son's life. And it worked. And so we went from say your goodbyes to having a plan in place for him to actually survive. And he just turned 23 years old. He's in college, and you would think that the fairy tale ending was enough for me to be happy, but every night I went to bed for about 4 or 5 years after he survived, the last thing that went through my head each night was, I wonder if he thinks if I gave up on him. And the truth was that I hadn't had these core values defined in my life. And so I let my emotions just run rampant during that time. And if I knew then what these things were that I know now, that conversation on the edge of the bed would have gone completely different. And it would have been filled with the things that matter most to me now. And so, this book was born out of that circumstance of not wanting anyone to be in the position where the worst storm of your life rolls in and you're unprepared to handle it. And so it helps people define these things so when they need them, they're right there.
Got it. Now, can you tell me, why we might start with what and not the why?
Well, many of us have been schooled to start with why. And the challenge with starting with why is that our why is born from these non-negotiable values, which are the what matters most to us. And if we don't define the what first, then the chances that they are in alignment with our purpose are slim and none. And so we have to start with what, because we activate those words to actually choose our purpose. And so for me, my black sheep values, creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, authenticity. I have an extra, right? I have 6. But my purpose is to creatively impact people's lives by authentically providing hope. If it sounds familiar, it's because it's loaded with my black sheep values. They are in alignment with one another. And when those two things are in alignment, it allows me to be incredibly adaptable and resilient with how I choose to honor that on a daily basis.
Wow. I mean, your story, is incredible.
It really is. It's kind of nuts.
I can't imagine what you've gone through. For a second, man, I talk about a split second. I put myself in your shoes, and I already start tearing up. I'm like, Sam, you can't tear up. We're doing a podcast right now. You know what I mean? You're not even on the show. You're interviewing somebody. You know what I mean? So tell me about the biggest lie about purpose.
Well, the biggest lie about purpose is that you find it. Purpose is not something we find. But I was told for decades that, we sort of have to go out and find, like, it's this quest, right? Like this Indiana Jones like quest to find our purpose, when the truth is that it's not something you find, it's something you choose. And if you want the choice to be correct, then you have to start with these unchangeable values that have been developed over the course of our lives.
I can't agree with you more. I really can't agree with you more. When you look at it from a 30,000 foot view, you know what I mean? Without those, you can't really, you don't have a compass.
Yeah.
You don't have a compass. You don't have a GPS. You just guessing at life.
That's exactly right. You're winging it.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. Now tell me 3 things that anyone needs to make a good decision.
Well, looking back over that time in the hospital, making incredibly bad decisions. I became obsessed a few years later with, well, what constitutes a good decision? And most of the people that I asked that question to, how do you know if you've made a good decision? All answer me the same way, which is based on some sort of a result or an outcome. And the science tells us that that's something called outcome bias. You can't actually decide whether or not you've made a good or bad decision based on an outcome, because we don't control outcomes. We can only control the deliberate intention that goes into making a decision. And so for me, a good decision is born out of these black sheep values. Are you honoring them or are you violating them? That's the first part. The second part is, have you considered all the facts? Now, what happened with my son was we were dealing with what I like to call the truth in the room. It was the truth in that room that the doctors told us they had run out of options. But the absolute truth was that that wasn't in fact true, that they just didn't know there was this other way to treat, because it was a new thing. And so I kind of relate it to these real estate apps, right? If you're looking to buy a house, you're on Zillow or whatever, and you say, I want a 4-bedroom, 2-bath. I want it in this neighborhood, in this school district with this many square feet and all that sort of stuff. And you narrow and narrow and narrow down your search. And when you finally hit send, you sit there and you go, there's only 2 homes. They're both out of my price range. I can't have the house that I want. And that's just not true. You have to sort of expand the parameters a little bit. Maybe you lower the square footage by 50 feet. Maybe you expand the neighborhood by a mile. And all of a sudden you've got 20 choices when you thought you only had 2. And so you've got to go beyond the truth in the room. And then finally, you have to honor what you're feeling in the moment, right? Our feelings can be absolute monsters if we ignore them. Yeah. And so you've got to acknowledge. It doesn't mean you have to resolve your feeling. It means you have to acknowledge whatever it is you are feeling. And if you can do those 3 things, have the decision born from those black sheep values, try to consider all the facts, not just the truth in the room, and then honor what you're feeling in the moment, it helps you stay committed to the decision that you make. And that is a good decision regardless of the outcome.
That makes total sense. How do you know that you made a good decision?
Well, for me, it's been incredibly focused of acting with deliberate intention, right? I can't just be intentional. You mentioned the GPS earlier, and the difference between being intentional and acting with deliberate intention. Being intentional is putting in the destination into the GPS, right? And just going that's where I want to end up, is down there. But acting with deliberate intention is knowing every move, every turn you're going to make between here and there, and doing it on purpose, right? And so that's sort of how I know that now I am making the best decisions possible, because I am doing those 3 things and making sure that those sort of boxes are checked, and not worrying about that result or that outcome. Because as you saw earlier with my son, I made a horrible decision to say my goodbyes. I should have never done that. I should have twisted it in a different way and really instilled hope in him. Yeah. But I had an incredible outcome, right? And so we see that in companies a lot, right? People get promoted based solely on outcomes or results, and not the consideration of how they came to make a decision. And so what ends up happening is sometimes you have some people who are making pretty awful decisions being promoted, and the rest of the organization goes, what the hell's going on here? That guy or that gal is a complete jerk, and now they're being promoted, and it's slowly destroying the culture of the organization, because people are only concerned with an outcome, and they're not concerned with the deliberate intention that went into making a decision.
So what are 4 functions of behaviors for adults?
So the 4 functions of behavior that I talk about in the book are really centered around our motivation, right? People confuse motivation with inspiration. And, inspiration, the easiest way for me to sort of describe it, inspiration is external, right? It is this You're being inspired by something outside of yourself. Motivation is internal. It's strictly guiding our behavior. And so the idea of the four functions of behavior, it's often used in children to sort of determine their motivation, right? Why are they doing what they're doing? But when we apply it to adults, it really still holds a lot of water, at least based on my experience of what I've witnessed. So the four functions are sort of the acronym SEAT, SEAT. The first is sensory, right? So you're doing something because it appeals to one of our senses, right? It feels good. Whatever we need to do, that's the reason that we're doing it. The second is escape. Which is we are doing something because we want to escape a particular situation. Your mother puts, the Brussels sprouts on the table and you run for the hills because you don't want to eat those Brussels sprouts. That is escape. The third is attention. So you're doing it because you want the attention of others. And then the final bit is tangible, right? So you're doing something for a specific reason. I am doing this because I want that. I want that promotion. I want that bonus. I want that house. I want that, whatever it might be. So when you understand that there are really only four reasons why humans do anything in those four categories, it really helps you stay committed to the goals that you set for yourself.
Love that. Now, Brant, I know a lot of people have a hard time, believe it or not, defining their core values.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I know you didn't for a while until something happened and you're like,
sure.
What's mine? Now, how would you help someone define their core values, their five?
So there's a couple of ways. A fun way, a really sort of easy way to start the conversation is to look at your favorites, right? There's a reason that we all have favorites, favorite songs, favorite movies, favorite foods. And part of that reason is because favorites connect our head and our heart, right? And so when our head and our hearts connect, it engages our limbic brain, which is where all of our emotional long-term memory is stored. It's the reason that you remember song lyrics or you remember quotes from movies, right? Is because of that limbic brain. Mm-hmm. And so the idea with favorites is start thinking, one of the exercises I do is have somebody tell me what their favorite movie is. Well, give me one of your top three favorite movies. And then I have them give me the Cliff Notes version. What's the 1 minute or less summary of that movie? And when they are explaining it to me, whether I've seen it or not, what I am listening for are the specific words that they use to describe the movie. Because when something is your favorite, you are very careful with the words that you choose. When something isn't, you don't really care all that much. And so those words that are sort of given in the description start to leave breadcrumbs back towards those things that matter most to us, those core values, right? So that's a fun way to do it. The other way that I sort of have helped people take a shallow dive into the values pool is I created an online assessment, and it's at findyourblacksheep.com. And you click on Find Your Flock, and it walks you through this real short assessment to sort of help you understand what matters most. So it starts by presenting you with about 125 commonly held core values. And then it simply says, any word that you read right now, give me your knee-jerk reaction. Do you like that word? Is it important to you? If it's important to you, go ahead and select it. And what we've discovered over the last couple of years of doing this work with thousands of people is that the average person selects at least 30 words. And so when that happens, my first question is, tell me what, crippling anxiety and depression feel like, because you've set yourself up for incredible failure here. There's no way you're going to be able to honor 30 things on a daily basis. There are going to be balls that drop, right? Yeah. And so what we do is we take that subset of however many words they chose, and we break it into 5 buckets based on likeness. So things like sympathy and empathy go in one box, achievement and success would go in another box. And sort of when they have all these things grouped together, they get to pick what's the one word you cannot live without, right? It's a non-negotiable. What's the one word? And that sort of gives you your introductory flock of 5 black sheep values, right? Now, here's what we know, and here's the real interesting part. Out of those 5, in the course of 2 years of working with people, I have never worked with anyone whose first 5 that they identified were the final 5 at the end of the training. right? So we know that 2 or 3 of what we're given are the absolute truth. And they can give me 20 different examples as to why over the course of their lives. But I also know that 2 or 3 of them are what I call aspirational sheep. They are not your sheep. They are either who you want to be or who somebody told you you should be, but they are not, in fact, your core values. And so it takes a little bit of time in tracking them to prove that they are indeed not yours.
That's yeah, you can't just pick your core values in a few minutes. That takes deep, soul searching and
Exactly.
deep conversations and like you said, is it really your core values or what you've been told? You know what I mean? That's something that needs to be differentiated, man. Very well said. Now, can someone be vulnerable and still be unbreakable?
I believe so.
Because a lot of times when I think about vulnerability, I think about, okay, I'm putting myself out there. I'm vulnerable. That means I'm weak. Especially as men. We've been taught to, bottle up our emotions, never show weakness, never be vulnerable, always, stay cool under pressure, and just do what we need to be done. But can I be vulnerable and still, keep my man card?
Yes. Well, first of all, listen, it's a great question. It is something that as a fellow sort of alpha male, it's really difficult at times for us to show vulnerability. I believe there is strength in vulnerability. I believe that sort of the tides are shifting there with the work of people like Brene Brown, who have sort of shined a light on shame and anxiety and vulnerability and all these sorts of things that affect us. But what I'll tell you is this: I a few years ago, I learned about something called Consumi, which was hot for a quick moment. And Consumi is a Japanese philosophy and a way to sort of fix broken pottery. And legend has it where this was born was there was an ancient Japanese shogun whose favorite tea bowl had been broken. And so he sent it out to be repaired. And when it came back, it had these ugly metal staples in it. And, they tried to repair it so that it looked exactly like it was, but it just wasn't, it was not pleasing to look at. And so when the shogun got it back, he's like, this is not going to happen. This is not right. So he sent it out to some local artisans and he said, I don't care what you have to do. I just want you to fix my bowl. It's my favorite bowl. And so rather than try to make it look exactly like it did before it got broke, what these artisans did is they went out and they got the most valuable thing that they could find in that at that time, which was gold. And they melted the gold down and they used the gold to repair the cracks. And by doing so, they did 2 things. One, they actually made the bowl more valuable than before it got broke because they used gold to repair it. But second of all, they told the history of the bowl, right? Those cracks started to tell a little bit of the story of that bowl's life. And when I read that, what I realized is that most of us spend our lives trying not to get broken, right? But if you really want to learn how to be unbreakable, it's having the realization that you're already broken.
Wow.
Right? And what we need to focus on is not trying to stop people from hurting us, but focus on what's holding our brokenness together. And that are these black sheep values.
Wow. That was whew, I love that. I'm going to tell that story. I'm going to quote you on that story. That's amazing. Now, I know something that a lot of people have a hard time with right now, including myself, especially with the phone and everything that's going on. And especially with so much uncertainties, the future is always uncertain. Nobody can predict the future. How do you stay present with so much uncertainty that's coming up in the world?
Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, Biologically speaking, our brains are wired to view uncertainty as a threat. And so it doesn't really matter how you want to do something. Your brain is chemically going to respond as that uncertainty is a threat. And so the crazy part about that is that our brains don't really care how we fix the threat. They just want the threat to be gone. And so you can convince yourself of things that are just categorically false. If you can get your brain to stop believing that it's a threat, right? Which we honestly, we are watching that happen before our eyes with the political landscape, the COVID, the mask wearing, the you name it.
Yeah.
People are convincing themselves of whatever it is they want to choose, even if it's wrong. And so that makes it incredibly difficult. But this idea here of how do we stay present? For me, I have a little hack that I like to use that comes from Lao Tzu, who was a ancient Chinese philosopher, right? And Lao Tzu said this. He said, if you're feeling depressed, you're living in the past. If you're feeling anxious, you're living in the future. And if you are at peace, you're living in the present. And so when I feel these emotions, it literally is telling me, if I am depressed, I'm like, gosh, stop beating yourself up for decisions that you can't change, that you made in the past. And if I'm feeling anxiety, it's because the uncertainty in the future. And so, it really helps me pull myself either forward or back to the present time, because that's the only place I can actually affect change.
Love that, man. Love that. I always said that as well.
Yeah.
Wow. This is very profound for everyone who's listening to this. It's very important to understand that if you live in the past, that's where depression lives. If you have anxiety, that's where future.
That's right.
Bring yourself back into the present.
Yes.
As you're at your peace and you're living your best life when you're at your peace. So you only have right now. You can't change the past, and you certainly can't predict the future.
That's the truth.
You know what I mean? So that's profound. Thank you for that. Now, with all this pandemic stuff that's going on, with all this pandemic stuff that's going on, all this craziness in the world, how do you stay focused during the pandemic? How do you not just wing life during the pandemic? A lot of people, that pandemic has made so many people better. Mm-hmm. I know, it certainly has with me. I had to regroup, I had to look at things differently, see what's kind of valuable to me, and how I would have managed my time. And it has made a lot of people worse.
Yeah.
What I mean? I made a lot of people worse. I'm not just talking about financially. They've just been off track.
Sure.
So how can you stay focused and during these uncertain times, and make sure that you're not winging it during a pandemic?
Yeah. Well, it's funny to me. One of the reasons that I really wanted to do this podcast with you is because it's called the 1%er. And to me, we all think of that in one specific way. Yes. But what I want people to understand is that I refer to 1%ers all the time, but what I'm referring to is the 1% of people who decide to do the work to figure out what matters most to them. Because it is a fraction of a percent of people who actually do the work. And you're seeing that right now, even with people who have sort of chosen during this pandemic of forced isolation to do some personal development work on their own. It's still a fraction of a percent of people who decide to do that. Everybody else allows their emotions to beat them up on a daily basis. And they get into these arguments on social media and they're just screaming at each other when they don't even know what it is that matters most. How I stay in the present, how I make sure that I don't allow myself to go off the deep end in these crazy times, is because all I'm concerned with are 6 things. I am literally saying creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, authenticity. Is what someone's saying to me violating one of those things? If they are violating one of those things, I can address it head on because I know exactly where I am being violated, right? If I don't do that work, then I can never quite put my finger on the thing that's making me upset. And so all I do is spout off these emotions and this emotional tornado that sucks everybody in my life into it. And at the end of the day, everybody's pissed off at each other. And so for me, if you want to make sure that you are not being sort of sucked into those things, then you have to have something to hold up your decisions to, these values, to say, okay, I know my emotions want to scream at this person right now. I know they've poked the monster a little bit, and my feelings want to reach out and just scream and strangle somebody. But is it really violating one of my black sheep? If the answer is no, then let it go, right? And that is something I've had to work at over the last couple of years. But now that it's become a sort of everyday part of my life, it's really easy for me to let things go that don't violate my black sheep values.
I love that, man. You know, you have your core values,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and every time, you know, there's something that's questionable, you come back to your core values. And if it doesn't fit your core values, it's got to go.
So here's the really interesting piece to this, right? And this is something that's not in the book that I found out afterwards, and it made me so ticked off because I want it in the book. And so I was like, oh. So what I discovered after doing all this research is that sheep recognize the voice of their shepherd. And when I found that out, I'm like, okay, I need to do work, because I didn't believe it, right? Like I'm going, what? Sheep can recognize. And I saw some videos of people calling out to sheep and they weren't responding to them. And all of a sudden the shepherd came and spoke, and they all turned and started to follow the shepherd. And so I'm like, well, maybe that's CGI or somebody messed with the editing. It's a deep fake of some kind. But what I discovered after doing the research is that it's not necessarily the shepherd. Sheep recognize the voice of the person that feeds them, right? Sheep actually have very short-term memories. And so if you are the one who is feeding them, that's the voice that they recognize. And so the reason that that's so important is that if you are feeding these black sheep values every day, if you're doing it with deliberate intention, you're programming them into your day to make sure that they're getting the food that they need for you to feel fulfilled, then they are going to be there when you call them, right? That's the whole point of this, is that they recognize that they are needed. And so they're right there. So here's the challenge. If you are feeding someone else's sheep that are not yours, guess who also shows up to the party and wants some of that food? And so that's why we have to make sure that the sheep we are feeding are indeed ours and not necessarily somebody else's. And that, to me, really helps during these moments of not flying off the handle too easily, because when I call these things that I need to settle me, they are there for me because I'm feeding them every day.
Got it. Wow. That's, I mean, I'm so glad that you reached out, you know, and want to be on my podcast. And 1% to me, like you said, 1%, everybody talks about, oh, you're the 1% of the population to make money. That's what people think. A 1%er, so you know, to me, it means that somebody who doesn't like where they are right now, their circumstances, and they put a plan together and they're willing to work that plan until to get to where they want to go. You know, so that was all that. I remember when I launched 1%, everybody was like, well, you're talking about you're better than everybody because maybe you're in shape or maybe you have money. I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with that. Nobody was in great shape when they started. Nobody had, you know, unless you were born into money, nobody had money, you know, all self-made. And I want the 1%er is somebody who doesn't like their circumstances and are willing to do the work and willing to persevere to get there. And I love that your definition of 1%er, and it's awesome. Brant, thank you so much for being on the show. You know, for people who are listening that want more information about your book, or maybe they want to, you know, get their core values set up and they want to consult with you, because I certainly have learned so much right here in this short interview that we have. Oh my God, you're a breath of fresh air. You're looking at, you have a crazy story, man. You know, I was doing everything in my power not to start crying, because I'm one of those guys, man, that, you know, I see a sad movie, man, I'm like crying. And I was like, and I bet, you know, what you told me when you said, you know, it's hard to, I almost started crying when you said, you know, my son said, you know, I'm going to miss you, daddy. And I'm like, oh, I have a son, man. I'm like,
Yeah.
myself in that split position, in your shoes. And I'm like, oh, I would have lost it, and I want to tell you that I appreciate you. Thank you for your time. And, please let us know where we can, get more of you.
Well, let me just say thank you, Sam, for having me. I truly appreciate it. The reason that you feel that way is because we probably share some of the same values, right? And that you felt that same violation that I feel. And so the best way that people can sort of figure out more about this in the work that I do, it's at findyourblacksheep.com. That's the book's website and has the assessment there. It's the easiest way. And the book comes out September 29th, available wherever you buy books. And so I hope people, that 1% of those who want to achieve something more, that believes there's something more for them out there in their life, they want to change what's possible. Let's hope that they find this book, they discover what matters most to them, and they start feeding those sheep.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was an honor and privilege having you on your show. And we definitely have to do this again. And if there's anything that we can do as a community to support you, please reach out.
I appreciate that. Thank you, brother.
Hey guys, if you like today's episode, do me a huge favor. Go ahead and leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, leave me a review, and tag a few friends that you think can benefit from what we shared today. Really appreciate it. God bless.